So hi and assalamualaikum. My name is Nur Afifah Binti Sabri, and today I will be talking about the analysis on children's short story Rapunzel. Okay, so before I jump into the analysis, I would like to give you a brief introduction of the story first. And I bet everyone knew about the girl in the picture on the screen. She's a very beautiful girl and has a very long beautiful hair as well. Okay, so I think it's popular enough for everyone to know about this already, and it is even adapted into a Disney movie which titled Tangled. Okay, so the girl named after a forbidden herb in enchanted garden of a witch. So her name is Rapunzel. So as well as the herb's name. Okay, so Rapunzel is in the story is a young girl of exquisite beauty who has been imprisoned from birth by a cruel witch in a tower. So the witch would call her every day to let down her hair, and she would climb to her using Rapunzel's hair to the top of the tower. Okay, so Rapunzel loved to sing, sorry, and one day a prince passed by and went through the woods, heard her and fell in love with her singing and herself as well. Okay, so they saw each other afterwards secretly until Rapunzel accidentally told the witch that she is much heavier than the prince. Then and that's how the witch knew that she has been looking or has been meeting the prince without her consent, without her knowing that. Okay, and the witch became so mad about it, and she grabbed Rapunzel by her hair and cut it off. So the long beautiful hair was lying on the floor, and Rapunzel was sentenced to a misery, and was sent to a desert. Okay, and the prince came afterward to meet Rapunzel as he always did, but he was shocked when he saw the witch instead of Rapunzel, and the effect of that, he fell into the thorny bushes and became blind. Okay, and then both of them wandered around not knowing where to go until one day the prince heard the Rapunzel singing, and he followed the voice, and they met eventually. So when they met, Rapunzel was crying, and surprisingly the tears of hers fell onto the eyes of the prince and healed it. Okay, and they got married afterwards and lived happily ever after. Okay, so I would like to start with the types of sentence first. Okay, so before I jump into the analysis, I would like to give you a brief explanation about the sentence. Okay, so according to Oxford Advanced Learners Dictionary, a sentence is a set of words expressing a statement, a question, and order, usually containing in a subject and a verb. So there are four types of sentences, which are simple, compound, complex, and compound complex. A simple sentence refers to a sentence that contains only one dependent clause. A compound sentence is a sentence that has at least two independent clauses joined by comma, semicolon, or conjunction. A complex sentence is a sentence that contains an independent clause and one or more dependent clauses. Lastly, a compound complex sentence is comprised of at least two independent clauses and one or more dependent clauses. Okay, so looking at the table here, we can see that the simple sentence were the least used by the author, and the compound complex were the most used by the author in this text. Okay, so I made a conclusion of it. So I think that the author used the minimum number of compound complex sentence because he tend to make the sentence look shorter but compact. Other than that, the author might use this type of sentence a lot to keep the readers reading the text in order to understand the full sentence. So I think that it requires high focus in order to digest the whole sentence and the situation that has been portrayed by the writer. And compound sentence were found as the second most used type, as it connects two or more independent clauses. It is way easier for the readers to read two or more situation in one sentence, as it is less messy than having more simple sentences that are formed by independent clauses. Complex sentences were the second least used type in the story because the author preferred to combine the complex and compound sentence altogether instead of using it individually. And meanwhile, the simple sentences were the least used as this text is focusing on higher comprehension level children. The author may not prefer to use simple sentences since it may make the text becomes way longer because it does not contain conjunction that can connect one sentence to another. And having fewer simple sentences also tend to make the writing looks more mature. Okay, now let's look at the examples provided. Okay, so in order to determine the types of sentence, you must look at the verb use first, the amount of verb used. Okay, so for simple sentences only use one verb in each sentence, and it cannot be more than one verb used. Okay, so as you can see in the screen that I provided 3 different sentences, and all of them only has one verb in it. Okay, and the second one is compound sentence, which were connected by comma, semicolon, or conjunction, and they are independent clauses that are connected together. And complex sentence, on the other hand, is a sentence that contains an independent clause and one or more dependent clauses. Okay, you can see the examples and examine which one is which. And the last one is compound complex sentence, which comprise of at least 2 independent clauses and more dependent clauses, and one or more dependent clauses. Okay, now let's moving on to the types of clauses. So, a clause is a group of words that includes at least a subject and a verb. Okay, so there are 2 types of clauses, which is independent clause, and also dependent clause. Okay, so independent clause is a complete thought that can stand on its own and does not rely on anything to form a complete sentence because it is a complete sentence itself. Okay, but for dependent clause, it is incomplete thought, and it must depend on the independent clause to form a full sentence. And there are 3 different types of dependent clauses, which are the noun clause, relative clause, and also adverbial clause. Okay, so now let's look at the table of analysis. You can see that independent clause as individual is leading in the text, which it were used at 36. Meanwhile, the relative clause were the least used at 13. Okay, so in conclusion for this analysis, looking at the type of sentence analysis, it is clear that more dependent clauses are used to form compound complex which need dependent clauses. My assumption of this matter is the author prefers dependent clauses more because it adds more information to make the sentences interesting. Okay, the independent clause is clearly the most used at 30 as individual because every sentence cannot stand without any independent clause. It is needed in order to form a simple, compound, complex, as well as compound complex sentence. Okay, so dependent clause such as noun clause was highly used compared to the other dependent clause at 26, as it mostly explained the necessary details by WH question to connect it with independent clause that complete the whole sentence. On the other hand, the author used adverbial as the second most used dependent clause at 17, since it needed to modify the verb, adjective, as well as adverb in the story to enhance the reader's understanding, since this type of clauses can help the readers imagine how the verb were done, and so on. Last but not least, relative clause was the least used type as the dependent clause at 13 because throughout the story there were not many explanations of nouns that were being used. However, the author mostly used this type of clauses to this type of clause to explain the details of the characters, the place in the settings, the whole situation, and etc. Okay, now let's look at the example. So the first one is a compound sentence which which involve two independent clause. So if you want to separate it, it's okay as well. Okay, the first one is Rapunzel is banished, and the second one is you will never see her again in the first example. So both of these clause can stand on its own to become a complete sentence, and it's considered as simple sentence. Okay, and the second one is dependent clause, which is the noun. Okay, looking at the first example, which is when that is ready, I will climb down and we shall escape. Okay, so the phrase or the clause sorry, that I've underlined, which when that is ready, is a noun clause, and it it emphasizes on what will happen next when the thing that we're talking that is talked about in the text is ready. Okay, and the last one, the next one is the dependent clause of relative. Okay, so she was so the first example is she was so angry that she took poor Rapunzel into a desert where she had to live in great grief and misery. So in here, relative is used to describe about the place, which is the desert. Okay, so it is a restrictive clause because the explanation is essential, and also the author used relative adverb where to describe the place. Okay, and then the last one is the dependent clause, adverbial. Okay, so the first one is it looked so fresh and green that she longed for it and had the greatest desire to eat some. So in here, the dependent clause, which is adverbial, modifies adjective of fresh and green, and the effect of it is the wife is longed for it. Okay, and the author used a subordinating conjunction that to link the both clauses. Okay, now we move on to a type of phrases. Okay, so phrase is a small group of words standing together as a conceptual unit. Okay, so there are 5 types of phrases, which are noun phrase, verb phrase, adjective phrase, adverb phrase, and prepositional phrase. So looking at the analysis table, you can see that the noun, as expectedly, were the highest or most used phrases in the text, at 212, and the adverb were the least used at 14. Okay, so the conclusion of the analysis, the author used a lot of noun phrase to explain the noun in the story as to its function, whereby it is complemented by pronouns for others. Okay, so other than that, the verb phrase used a second leading phrase because the story involves many actions that should be explained by verbs. These verbs are usually accompanied by linking verbs such as is, are, was, were, and am. Okay, prepositional phrase were used a lot as well, since the settings of the story involves many places that can be described using prepositional phrase. And adjective and adverb phrase were the least used phrase in the story, since the author preferred to use the actual adjective and adverb to explain or modify noun, verb, adverb, and adjective. Okay, now let's look at the example. Okay, so in this example, it contains of noun, verb, and prepositional phrase. Okay, in this way, the prince roamed in misery for some months, and at length came to the desert where the witch had banished Rapunzel. Okay, so the findings were the noun is the prince, some months, the desert, and also the witch, whereby the verb phrase was had banished, and the prepositional phrase was in this way. Okay, now let's look at the adjective and adverbial phrase example. Okay, the man who loved her thought, sooner than let my lovely wife die, I will bring her some of the Rapunzel myself, no matter what the cost. Okay, so the findings are noun, the man, my lovely wife, her. So for your information, pronoun is counted as noun phrase as well. Okay, so the Rapunzel, myself, what the cost, and no matter. And the verb is will bring. So in this verb phrase, it uses will as the modal verb to modify the verb bring. Okay, so the adjective phrase was my lovely wife, and adverb was sooner than let my lovely wife die. Okay, now let's move to the last part, which is parts of speech. Okay, all languages are made up of words, each of which has a specific function, a part to play in creating the sentence in that language. We call this function the parts of speech. There are 8 parts of speech in English, which are noun, pronoun, verb, adverb, adjective, preposition, conjunction, interjections. Okay, now let's look at the analysis and the conclusion of it. Okay, so as you can see in the table, that as expected, noun is the most used parts of speech because it literally explains everything, and the least used is the interjection, because this text did not involve or did not include much dialogue that can contain interjection. Okay, and the conclusion of it, in this text, noun would be in any text, noun would be the dominant usage as it introduced the characters, place, and objects, and literally every detail in the story. The usage of noun is no longer questionable, as its function as the highlight of every story is so obvious. Okay, so meanwhile, verbs were used as this text is a story which involve a lot of action. The verbs used to make the story ongoing and to describe what happened in the storyline. Pronoun was used because the writer decided to not repeat the character's name all over again, hence he replaced most of the nouns with its pronouns. Following next, the writer used conjunction in order to connect one clause to another. Preposition used to describe the places in the settings. Adverb and adjective were used to modify noun, verb, adverb, adjective, and to make the noun more describable, as well as adding extra flavor to the story by adverbs use. Interjection, as I mentioned before, it was least used in the story because this story didn't involve much dialogue to include interjection. So I have picked a sentence or an example that contain all of the 8 parts of speech in it. Okay, so you wicked child, cried the witch. What do I hear thee say? I thought I had separated you from all the world, but you have deceived me. So then, the findings of this sentence were noun, child, witch, what, say, world, pronoun, you, I, T, all, me, adjective, wicked, verb, cried, do, hear, thought, had, separated, have, deceived, preposition, from, conjunction, but, interjection, ah. And I have another example of it. Okay, we may now move to the conclusion. So in conclusion, this whole assignment is thorough observation on details. It may cause confusion in order to determine which one is which because it contains many types of grammatical structures. The text is kind of long, which makes it a little bit distracting to determine the right grammatical structure used in each sentence. Overall, this assignment somehow taught me to pay my fullest attention, since a small inattentiveness may lead to totally different meaning of the text. Okay, and about the text itself, I would say that it is suitable for children above 7 years old, since the structure of the sentences used is quite long and it's thorough continuous reading. But it is the recommendation for the kids with English as first language as early as 7-8 years old, because the word used are nothing odd nor confusing despite the structure. However, for the kids as with English as second or third language or foreign language, they might need guidance from guardians in order to digest the whole text. Okay, so a child may not get the actual meaning of the whole sentence if they cannot handle compound or complex sentence, because the writer used these types of sentence a lot in this text to make it less boring. Okay, and the recommendation that I have or can be made to improve this text is for the editors to recheck the grammatical errors, especially punctuations. I noticed many absence of commas, especially when the writer connects two or more clauses in order to sum it into one sentence. The editor should be stricter and pay fullest attention towards the area, because careless mistake could lead to a worse scene whereby the kids might misunderstood or misconcepted as the correct way of using punctuation. All in all, I would still suggest this text to be a source of improving English. The fact that it relates to our childhood fairy tales animation that we used to watch make it more inviting to be read, and I believe that every scene cannot be portrayed in animation or photos, but we can always look for detail in words. Thank you.